These days, Big Muffs are a bit of a guitar institution. They've been used by everybody, including David Gilmour for those big searing leads on the wall, to like really crushing doom metal riffs, and even lo-fi indie gives a bit of Big Muff love every now and then too. For the uninitiated, the best way to sort of describe the Big Muff sound is to sort of just go whoa. It's sort of like those Hans Zimmer horn sort of things that were like on every film trailer in the 2010s after Inception. Huge bass, almost no mids, a really fizzy top end, but also kind of smooth and liquidy at the same time. If you're ever in a room where a Big Muff is being played at full volume, it's a pretty fun experience. Unfortunately, buying a Big Muff isn't that easy. You see, Big Muffs were made by Electro Harmonics, and even though Electro Harmonics makes some of the best pedals that have ever been made in human history, Electro Harmonics are also well known for not really being concerned with quality control. Historically speaking, they kind of built whatever pedals they were making out of whatever cheapest parts they could find, and there was a bit of a that'll do sort of mentality going on. I'd like to point out that these days it's a little bit different, sort of, but yeah, they've had a pretty colourful history. But that also makes their pedals pretty quirky. Like the Big Muff that you buy from Electro Harmonics will be a little bit different from everybody else's. And everyone just kind of rolls with it because that's kind of how good those pedals are. So specifically speaking, what impact has this had on the Big Muff? Well, quite a lot actually. You see, the Big Muff is a pretty simple circuit, so when you like change one little part, it has a fairly significant impact on the sound. It'll still do the Big Muff thing, but it'll do it in a slightly different way. I mean, us guitar nerds always like to say, they don't make them like they used to. And with the Big Muff, it's, fairly accurate. So it started off with the triangle Big Muff, like that was the first version of the Big Muff, and then after that they made the Ram's Head, which is the famous version that David Gilmour plays. Then Electro Harmonics went out of business for a little bit, so they came back a little bit later building them in Russia, and then there was the New York version. It's changed a fair bit over time. And look, if you want to do a deep dive on the history of the Big Muff, which is actually kind of an interesting story if you're a pedal nerd like I am, please feel free to check out other videos. It has been documented 1,000 times by people who know the topic way better than I do. Kit Ray, his website is amazing for the history of the Big Muff. And Gilmourish is, as per usual, a good source to refer to as well. But long story short, there's 5 main versions of the Big Muff. And that's what we're going to look at today. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be doing a shootout with all 5. Hello. Hey, come here. Come here. Hey, come here. Hello. Yeah, hello. Hello. Hey. Are you beautiful? Yeah. Yeah, you're beautiful. Hey. Does this fix? Does it make happy? Yeah. Hello. We're getting another kiss? No. You happy? Yeah. Okay. Thank you for saying hello. Thank you. I'm not sorry, he's adorable. So what we're going to do today is a shootout between the 5 main versions of the Big Muff and figure out which one goes best in which circumstance. As I said earlier, all the Big Muffs do kind of the same thing, but with that being said, some versions of the Big Muff work better in some circumstances than others, so hopefully this will help figure out which Big Muff is best for you. Quick note on settings, I was originally going to set up every pedal to have the exact same settings, and then I quickly discovered that that wasn't going to be a fair comparison. The tone stack on all of these pedals is completely different. So setting the tone in the exact same position for each Big Muff, it wasn't really a fair comparison. Case in point, my Wren and Cuff ram's head, which is really hard to say, the tone stack for that actually works backwards. You turn it anti-clockwise to make it brighter and clockwise to make it darker. So, I mean, the fact that that pedal is in this means that if I had the tone stack in the same spot, it wouldn't really be fair. So what I've done instead is tried to dial in each pedal for the circumstance and see how they go in like the best settings for that circumstance. Everything's running through the Marshall, through the V30s, except for the Gilmour bit where I run through the Fender Bassman. No, a Fender Bassman is not a high watt, but I do not have a high watt with me, unfortunately. I want a high watt. If anybody would like to give me a high watt DR103, I would be very happy with that, but I don't think that's going to happen. That being said, the Bassman is at least in the same genre as the high watt. It's about 100 watts, it's all tube, it's a pretty clean amp with a lot of headroom. It takes a lot to really drive it, and also it's insanely loud. So not a high watt, but ballpark, but yeah. Anyways, let's get on with it, shall we? Oh, what's that? The Pink Floyd fanboy who's obsessed with The Wall, he went out and got himself a ram's head Big Muff to try to sound like David Gilmour? Say it ain't so. Who saw that coming? Now, first thing I hope that this demo shows is that you just can't take a Strat, plug it into a Big Muff, and expect to sound like David Gilmour. Doesn't work that way. Aside from the fact that to sound like Gilmour, you first of all need to play like Gilmour, which is really, really hard to do. Gilmour would do all sorts of weird stuff to his pedals. He was rarely just running the Big Muff by itself. So generally speaking, I would argue if you're trying to do Gilmour and just doing it with a Big Muff by itself, you'll get close-ish, but not really. Kind of like the Bassman, it's close-ish, but also not really. Now for Pulse and other more modern Floyd stuff, he was generally using a Civil War Big Muff. And in my very humble opinion, if you are looking for a Big Muff that you can plug in and sound like Gilmour, the Civil War is probably the one to go with. The Civil War Big Muff is probably the smoothest of all the Big Muffs. It's got that really thick, huge bottom end that, you know, Big Muffs are really famous for, but the tone doesn't get that fizzy or bright. Instead, there's a lot of liquidy mid-range that does work really well for lead. So yeah, if you're looking for like one Big Muff pedal by itself that will sound like Gilmour, Civil War's probably a good shout. That being said, if you are interested in going full Gilmour and like copying his entire signal chain, which I've done a few times, then you really do actually want the ram's head. While the ram's head can actually kind of get a bit nasty, it's got like this upper mid thing that can get a little bit like sinus scrapey. It's kind of the only way I can describe it. The ram's head Big Muff handles extra gain probably better than all the others. In other words, boosting one of these with something else kind of works better than any of the other Big Muffs I've tried. Also, even though the Civil War has got a lot of mid-range to it, this also has a lot of mid-range, which means it tends to sound fairly natural and it sounds less like you've got a pedal on. So yeah, if you want one pedal that you can imitate Floyd with, probably the Civil War. If you're dedicated to going full Gilmour, you probably want to go the ram's head. A bit of a side for a slightly spicy opinion, I think that the Triangle is well worth a look by any Big Muff aficionado if you're trying to Gilmour. There's been times where I'm going full Gilmour and it just wasn't working out for whatever reason, so then I would swap out the ram's head for the Triangle and it would work better in some circumstances. I wonder if it's one of those things whereby Gilmour does better with the ram's head, but the rest of us mere mortals might actually have more luck getting those noises out of a Triangle. So yeah, in summary, if you're trying to sound like Gilmour and you want a muff by itself, Civil War. If you're going full Gilmour, go ram's head. And if neither of those are working out for you in terms of getting it, Gilmour sort of noise, look at a Triangle. Might be some of the least helpful advice I've ever given, but hey, there we go. Okay, now we move on to the big heavy doom metal stuff. All the pedals in this circumstance were set to full volume and full gain, so you can hear everything that these pedals have to offer. Big Muffs are kind of weird with their gain control. It's called sustain, which okay, whatever. But they sort of get really gainy really quickly, and then there doesn't seem to be much gain added after that. So it can sort of be a bit deceptive how much gain these pedals actually have. But yeah, now you can see the full sweep. Now, pro tip, if you're after that big whoom sort of noise, then you really want to run the volume on the pedal on full. Big muffs really open up the more volume on the pedal there is. If you roll it back, it sort of compresses in on itself, whereas when you wind the volume up, it really opens up and starts sounding huge. I do want to point out, when I've been using a Big Muff in any circumstance or of any variety, whenever I'm running the volume that high, I am going to get a volume boost out of my amp. But at the same time, you're playing a Big Muff. If you're playing a Big Muff, you're not exactly going for subtlety, are you? Another quirk about the Big Muff is that the tone knob is really sensitive. There's probably about 38 different tones you can create just with the tone knob by itself. On lower settings, you'll get a lot more mid-range and you'll get less of that fizzy top end, and you get a kind of more of a thuddy sort of sound out of it. But then when you start to crank that tone knob up, you really start to get that, fizzy, shrieking top end, which really helps cut through a mix, which is important because these things have no mids. There's also a sweet spot on all of the tone knobs where after pushing it up to a certain point, it'll start to get really screechy and really bright. It sort of adds a whole bunch of treble, not upper mids, but treble, that just sort of really makes it quite piercing and pretty nasty. I don't really like using my Big Muffs that way, so I've tried to find the setting for all of these pedals where it's just before it gets screechy. Now, I think the obvious winner here is the Russian Big Muff, which I'm sure is not a surprise to anyone. Russian Big Muffs are actually very similar to the Civil War Big Muff, but while this is sort of lacking in top end, this has some of the most amount of top end that you would ever get out of a Big Muff. The Civil War is big, warm, and liquidy. This is teeth and aggression with a massive bottom end. To be honest, I've got a bit of a love-hate relationship with Russian Big Muffs. I won't use one for a while, and then I'll plug the Russian Big Muff in and I'll just be like, whoa, this is awesome. It's got so much of everything. And then a couple of weeks later, I'll be like, oh God, it's got way too much bottom end. Or 6 weeks later, I'll be like, oh God, it's got way too much top end. There's even been once or twice where I've gone, oh my God, it's got too much mid-range. But that being said, in the circumstance that we're dealing with, as in doom metal, too much is probably exactly what you're after. And if I was doing any sort of like doom metal thing, Russian Big Muff every single time. Also, I know that my riffs aren't that doomy. I spent too long listening to Exodus and Metallica to really slow down. I can't do this Sun thing and just play a note for 12 minutes and call it a song. Sorry. Now, on bass, I have to either give it to the Ram's Head again because I like that it's so much and the extra bass really works well with a bass guitar. However, I also really like the Civil War, surprisingly. What I like about the Civil War Big Muff on bass is that it just sort of creates this like smooth blanket of fuzz that the notes then, punch and jump out of, which kind of works really well in a mix. That sort of blanket of fuzz just really glues everything together. So hey, I guess it depends what you're after with your bass fuzz. Are you trying to remove eyeballs, or are you trying to create a big warm sound that fills the room? It's up to you, but yeah, Civil War or Russian works really well on bass. Here's a question. Was I ripping off Metallica's Seek and Destroy with this riff? Or was I ripping off Black Label Society Genocide Junkies? Or was Black Label Society ripping off Seek and Destroy when they did Genocide Junkies?
Pepe Sylvia, this name keeps coming up over and over again. Every day, Pepe's mail's getting sent back to me. Pepe Sylvia, Pepe Sylvia. I look in the mail, well, this whole box is Pepe Sylvia!
First of all, Big Muffs love P90s. If you're gonna play with Big Muffs and have it be a big part of your thing, please get some P90s. They love P90s. Secondly, all of these demos were run into the Crunchy Marshall. It was not on the clean channel. Now, a muff into a dirty amp is a very specific sound that I absolutely wouldn't recommend in many circumstances, but it's kind of cool. I wouldn't call it a pleasant sound by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, it's grimy, it's chaotic, it's got this really thuddy bottom end that kind of makes it hard for the notes to jump out of, but it's just fun to play. It's actually my favorite way to play Big Muffs. I find myself running a Big Muff into a dirty amp more often than not. So yeah, do with that what you will. It's definitely not everybody's flavor. If this is like your most hated tone, yeah, I get it, but hey, I like it. Another tip if you're gonna run your muffs dirty, really experiment with that tone knob. The tone knob into a dirty amp has a huge impact because that screechy top end of a Big Muff is gonna struggle to get through on an overdriven amp in almost any circumstance. So a lot of people actually run their Big Muffs with the tone knob like really, really low, because that way you get a huge amount of mid-range and kind of let the amp deal with the top end. That definitely works, although I do like to brighten up that mid-range by having the tone knob up fairly high. So again, your mileage may vary. It's very worthwhile experimenting with your tone knob. Personally, I like the Ram's Head best here. The mid-range of the Ram's Head is probably the most natural out of all of them. So therefore, it doesn't really sound like I'm running a pedal here. I mean, it does, but you know, in comparison, it sounds much more natural here, and it just sort of sounds like I'm playing with a really disgusting amp that's set to kind of trying to explode, but somehow not. Last but not least, I've been told that if I'm going to demo Big Muffs, I need to play this Smashing Pumpkins riff. So enjoy. Now, as I said earlier, the way that I'm setting the Big Muffs in this demo is not the way I like to run my Big Muffs, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a sound. There are some people who go completely nuts over Billy Corgan's Big Muff. Which Big Muff did he use? How did he get that noise? So, hey, if this is a sound that you dig, enjoy. I mean, it is a kind of cool sound because it really like jabs you in the eyeballs, but it's also kind of smooth at the same time. Anyway, so overall with the Smashing Pumpkins thing, I have to admit, this is where the big boy won. This is where the New York City Muff kind of won out for me. Mostly because, in my humble opinion, this is the nastiest muff that I own. So yeah, if you are looking for, you know, that big muff that has that really sort of, you know, I'll run the tone knob all the way up and gouge out my audience's eyeballs, this is probably the one that you're looking for. There is also another version of this which uses an op amp in there, and that version gets even brighter and harsher. So if you listen to my Smashing Pumpkins imitation and thought that that wasn't nasty enough, then yeah, you definitely want the op amp one. I am being a bit mean to this sound. I mean, it is a pretty cool sound. It's sort of got that lo-fi kick to it where there's a huge amount of distortion, but there's a lot of nastiness, but there's also that smoothness to it. So yeah, it's definitely a noise, and if it's your bag, enjoy. Conclusions. What did we learn? Well, this shootout actually had fairly different results to what I was expecting. When you plug each of these pedals in, the first noise that you get is always dramatically different to the previous Big Muff that you had plugged in. So you walk away with this impression that all the pedals are really, really different. However, realistically speaking, after I had dialed in the pedal for the sound that I was looking for, they weren't that different. I will still say that there was probably a clear winner in each circumstance, but I would be hard pressed to say that any of them were unusable. Speaking of which, I think I need to give an extra shout out to the Triangle Big Muff here, which I don't think this video got enough love for. The reason why I want to give the Triangle Big Muff a shout out is that even though I don't think it won any of the circumstances, in my very humble opinion, it came second almost every time. So if you don't want to be a massive tragic pedal nerd like I am and, you know, buying every kind of Big Muff that exists, if you only want to buy one Big Muff that kind of does it all, the Triangle Big Muff is going to be a very good choice. Or as Ren and Cuff so delicately put it, it's probably going to be the good one, right? Speaking of which, all of my Ren and Cuff Big Muffs, all of them have all of the mods. However, in this demo, I want to emphasize that all of the mods were off, so you were hearing just the straight up Big Muff tone without any of the other fancy stuff. As per usual, whenever I do something like this, there is a second video where you can check out every demo by itself, and you can decide for yourself which Big Muff you like best in which circumstance. There are also other variations of the Big Muff that I don't really regard as major versions of the Big Muff. There's like the Hazuma Taz, there's the Metal Muff. I hate the Metal Muff. I mean, if that's your thing, enjoy. Not my thing. So yeah, there's still other variations, but hopefully this has covered the 5 main variations so you can sort of figure out which genre of Big Muff you like best. And if you don't own a Big Muff yet, seriously, find the one that you like the best out of all of these demos and go out and buy that one. Or just buy a Triangle Big Muff. Because the recorded noise didn't make much sense to me until I heard the noise in the room. It is one of those noises that guitar players who have played with a Big Muff are kind of going to be more, I guess, sympathetic to the noise than somebody who has never heard a Big Muff on full tilt in the room. It's one of those circumstances where you have to know what it sounds like in the room in order to really appreciate it. And if you've ever been in a room with a Big Muff on full tilt, you know exactly how much fun it is. That's it for me today. I hope you had fun. I hope you've been able to make a couple of wise decisions about which pedal to get. And if nothing else, do what I did and get all of them. Have a good one.